Welcome back for round 2 of the Demystify Sci Mobcast. Today we were looking at the mob's involvement in the assassination of JFK. If you have done any reading below the surface level of Wikipedia on the JFK assassination, you are probably aware that a lot of things don't add up about what happened there. What you might not understand is the incredible research of Louis Ferrante, who is actually a former mobster himself, spent a number of years in prison, and learned a ton about the history of his organization. Lou does an exceptional job of weaving together the story of the shadowy world of the mob in the 20th century and how it leads to a feud with the Kennedys, the Cuban exiles during the revolutionary period in Cuba, and the CIA, who really wants to take back Cuba and squeeze the Russians out. It is an incredible story. The details of the mob's involvement is much more central than I'd ever imagined or than I'd ever heard in anybody else's presentations. So if you're into the Kennedy assassination, you do not want to miss this episode.
If you like the story, Lou has written all of these details and far more in the second volume of his 3-part series called the Borgata Trilogy, which starts with the history of the mob in Sicily in the 1860s and progresses all the way through to the early 2000s, and you should check that out. If you want to get a little bit of background on this conversation, listen to the episode that we released earlier this week, and that'll catch you up to speed so you can just hit play, sit back, and enjoy what we have for you here today.
Remember, guys, the podcast is entirely supported by you. We work directly for you, which means we don't have any sponsors to answer to. But in order to keep it that way, we need you to check out our Patreon page over at patreon.com/demystifysci. And you can just give us a few dollars or give us a ton of dollars. It will all go towards the same end, which is making sure we have more time and resources to put towards this project. In exchange, we give you the episodes early, and you can come and hang out with us face-to-face over at our Sunday weekly patron Zoom chat. And I'd love to see you there. If you're really into what's going on here, you definitely don't want to miss the conference that we're putting on this summer, which is going to be in Sesimbra, Portugal on June 12th through the 16th. We're bringing together a historic panel of cosmologists to discuss the crisis surrounding the new James Webb data about the Big Bang. There is absolutely a paradigm shift unfolding right now, and you don't want to miss that event. Speaking of paradigm shifts, we're starting a new program called Paradigm Drift, which is essentially a gong show for science. You, as an audience member, have a chance to throw your name in a hat and perhaps be randomly chosen to present your theory to us and our panel, where you'll have, a minute or so, perhaps less, to present your idea. And after that, Nasi and I and our panel, whoever that's going to be, is going to interview you about your idea, where you got it, what you've been up to, and along the way, hopefully we'll help you guys present your ideas a little cleaner.
If you want to sign up for that, the link is in the description. The first recording is February 20th at 6:30 p.m. We're going to have our panel there. We're going to have all of the names that we're going to pull out of the hat, and we would love to have an audience. So even if you don't have a theory to present, come by February 20th, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, and we'll see you there.
All right, hope you enjoy part 2 with Lou Ferrante, and we'll see you guys next time.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The Demystify Sci Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
One piece of the Kennedy story that's always been the most obvious to me since I was 12 years old and first really read about it is the Jack Ruby situation, which is just, not knowing anything about the mob or anything about anything. When you see the guy who's been arrested for an assassination being killed just after he's captured, even as a little kid, I just remember thinking, that's kind of weird. Like, that doesn't seem right. But then, and I'd always heard like whispers of Jack Ruby's mob connection, but until I read your book, I had no idea that Jack Ruby was at the center of so many different interactions and meetings surrounding the days leading up. And after Oswald is captured, Jack Ruby's, at the hospital, like seeing if Kennedy's killed, and he's getting worked up, and there's these reports of him, vomiting and just freaking out basically, and then going and essentially stalking Oswald at various, police barracks and so forth. And yeah, I don't know. I would love to obviously folks are going to have to read the book. This is an incredible story, and there's so many details we just can't possibly cover here. But I would love to hear how much well, maybe a little bit just about Jack Ruby's story and how he fits into the whole Oswald connection. But honestly, I'm open. You know how to tell the story better than me, so if you want to go about it a different way, that's totally
I'm
fine.
glad you brought up Ruby.
Yeah.
So Jack Ruby is a crucial figure in the whole thing, and he's not only just the guy who silenced Oswald, but just as you said, leading up to the assassination, there's a lot of strange things that Ruby is involved with, and a lot of strange people he's talking to and meeting with, and they're all mob connected or Teamster connected. Don't forget now, Jimmy Hoffa is very close with the mob, and Jimmy Hoffa desperately wants Bobby dead or out of office. So Jimmy Hoffa is very, very in bed with the whole cabal as well. As far as on the Mafia side of the cabal, it's mainly Santo Trafficante, Carlos Marcello, to a lesser degree Sam Giancana, maybe, and John Roselli, and also to Jack Ruby plays a major part in this. They need and Carlos Marcello of Louisiana. Carlos Marcello is the hub of the conspiracy, by the way. And his life was turned upside down by Bobby. So Jack Ruby has a direct connection. Carlos Marcello has $1 billion a year empire. That's what they believe. The guy who was in charge, Aaron Cohn, who was in charge of the crime and law enforcement sort of task force into the Mafia in Louisiana, and he couldn't get anybody to go after Marcello because he realized he controlled the entire state machinery. If Cohn, for example, presented a list of people who were paid for on Marcello's payroll, whoever gave Cohn the list would be arrested. Like that's like how bad it was in Louisiana, how much Marcello controlled the state machinery. He put the governor in, he put the mayor in, he put the commissioner of police in. Everybody was in his pocket. So Marcello eventually expands his empire into Texas, which is adjacent to Louisiana, and he controls all of the local state machinery in Texas as well. But all of the mob and the underworld is answers to Marcello through his satellite Borgata, which was Joe Civillo and Joe Campisi, the boss and underboss in Texas. They answer directly to Marcello. So Ruby leaves Chicago, lands in Texas, and gets in with the Civillo Campisi mafia, who answers directly to Marcello in Louisiana. And Louisiana, by the way, Texas, by the way, was where Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy's vice president, is from. And Marcello, there's evidence that Marcello underwrote Johnson's campaigns for many, many years, congressional and senatorial campaigns. And in return, Johnson would kill anti-rackets, anti-gambling legislation in committee and make sure it never even hit the floor for a vote. So Johnson did his part for Marcello. So everybody feels like if they did get rid of Kennedy, the mob felt like they'd have an ally in Johnson. Hoover went to lunch every week with Johnson. He was very close with Johnson. He'd have an ally in Johnson. And the Cuban exiles believed that Johnson would do more for them than Kennedy was doing, because Kennedy kept dropping the ball. Anybody was better than Kennedy, and they did feel that Johnson would do more for them. So now everybody would prefer Johnson to Kennedy. So that's another big piece of the puzzle. So now Jack Ruby, he's running around. He's a Chicago thug, Chicago mob guy. He either gets thrown out of or chased out of Chicago or leaves of his own accord, but he lands in Texas. And he picks up there and he starts opening up these topless joints, and he's putting out gambling machines that basically are Marcello gambling machines. You couldn't put a gambling machine anywhere in any establishment if it wasn't Marcello's. He controls the state and he controls all the machinery.
I have a question. So you say that he leaves Chicago and he lands in Texas, and very quickly he's working for Marcello. Is there just some kind of whisper network where by the time that he lands in Texas, people already know that he's coming and the family is welcoming him with open arms and finding stuff for him to do?
Correct. If I went to Arizona one time, and there was a very small remnant of a mob family in Arizona, and as soon as I got there, they greeted me. They got word that I was coming down there. So we have a grapevine. We talk to each other. And when I went to Lewisburg Penitentiary, I mentioned that to you guys earlier in the conversation. When I landed in Lewisburg, or in a different part, not sure. I landed in Lewisburg. Basically, the heads of different families greeted me. Hey, Louis, we heard you're coming. We got a whole thing for you. Here's some soap. Here's some shaving cream. We got a bag for you. Anything you need. Let's take you around the yard, introduce you to all the heads of the different gangs. So we have our own grapevine. Ruby obviously leaves Chicago, lands in Texas, and the grapevine would already be waiting for him. And not obviously, I should say, obvious to a mob guy, not obvious to people who don't know how it works, but they do. So it's a good question, because people would wonder, how the hell do you just go to like the nearest phone booth and see if there's something written on the wall?
Well, I think it's not clear to like people on the outside like how much cooperation there is amongst these different families, and like if there's competition or it seems unimaginable perhaps to somebody in the business world that these different corporations would actually cooperate necessarily, but it seems like there's a lot of that.
Murder is a good incentive to cooperate.
Yeah.
That's like always, there's murder always in the background. Yeah, there's like, if you step out of line, if you don't follow the rules, like if Ruby, let's say, landed in Texas and said, I'm Jack Ruby, you know who I am? I'm taking everything over. They would have rolled him up in a rug and threw him in a bay somewhere. It would have been done, crocodile food. So that would have been that. But he goes there and he plays by the mob rules. He's been around mobsters his whole life. And he goes, look, Joe Civillo, Joe Campisi, he probably said someone sent me. There probably wasn't, some type of introduction to somebody, but he picks up there pretty quickly. And he is a very gregarious guy. And he starts to corrupt the police force, which was already corrupt in Dallas. But he gets really, he becomes the master of corruption. And you cannot hang out with cops and sort of like hobnob with police officers and law enforcement agents all day long if you're in the mob and not get killed, unless, and this is a big unless you're corrupting them on behalf of the mob. So Ruby is sort of like hanging out at the Dallas Police Department all the time. He's got all the cops in his pocket. He throws topless night, Tuesday night or Wednesday night, free drinks, free girls. All the cops could come here and hang out. They love it there. And then the next night is mob night, or once in a while the mobs hang out with the cops. But pretty much it's because he's corrupting them that he's allowed to carry on this relationship with the cops and also with the mob. So the mob knows they got an inside guy who's really good at corrupting the cops. So as soon as Oswald is picked up for the murder of Kennedy, and what role he played, if any, is something we could discuss too at length. But as soon as Oswald is picked up, Ruby goes into, as you said, panic mode. And so Ruby is I'm the first one to say this. So I've given some new insights in the book that nobody's ever discussed, and I've read hundreds of books on the Kennedy assassination.
This part really stood out to me. I just want to say it too. I just had never seen these perspectives before, and I really enjoyed this part.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So one thing I thought was a new insight I could bring to the table is a lot of historians, apparently Lee Harvey Oswald was interrogated for 12 hours without audio, without video, and without a stenographer. And they said, well, historians, who I take it work for the establishment somehow, because they've bent themselves into pretzels to try to explain this away. And one guy said ridiculously, why did they need a stenographer or an audio recording when he just shrugged a lot? Okay, if that's true, first of all, I don't believe someone shrugged for 12 hours and you persisted. I mean, if you shrugged for an hour or two, I've had enough of your shrugging. We're done with you. Okay, 12 hours, he shrugged a lot. Okay. And aren't we still entitled to a record of those questions? 12 hours of questions. Let us know what you asked him. Let us know what he shrugged to. Let us know when he felt like he needed a glass of water or a breath of fresh air. What question rattled him? Something. Nothing. So I feel personally that Ruby, who had the Dallas police in his pocket, they were letting him know that Oswald was talking, not that he wasn't talking, that he was talking. And that's why Ruby's throwing up his guts, pacing up and down, doesn't know, calling up long lost friends and relatives going, I love you. I may never see you again. This is like this is a man who feels like he's ready. He's done. And he's, I think, getting word that Oswald's a lot more talkative than we have been led to believe.
So I think we got to back it up and figure out why Ruby thought that Oswald was in the position to ruin a lot of things in his circle. because I mean, Ruby basically gives up his life to make this move, right? I mean, he does it. Not quite. I mean, he's definitely going to commit this murder in plain sight, like in the middle of the police department, and he's going to go down for it, basically. So he must be really at the end of his rope, or really worried about what Oswald has to say.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. So he is doing it in broad daylight. He knows he's going to be arrested for it. And the only reason I said not quite is because that's true. It's a suicide mission. There's 77 police officers or whatever it is that are flooding the underground garage where Oswald is coming out. They're going to tackle you, and you're going to jail for this hit. You're not escaping it. However, if you think about it like this, if Oswald was a little too talkative and Ruby feels like he's part of the conspiracy and it's going to come out, would you rather be arrested for assassinating the president of the United States or having something to do with it, or killing the man who did and being a hero? The public loved Ruby. They were cheering him. And Ruby said 9 out of 10, I beat the case. People aren't going to give me a hard time. I'll be pardoned or whatever, even if I get a lot of time. So he felt like you could be from a zero to a hero. He just needs to kill Oswald.
There's also the fact that he doesn't live very long, right? After this happens, like he dies of cancer very shortly after all of this.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he had some sense that he was not long for this world.
There's a guy involved in the plot who's a mastermind of the plot, David Ferry, who worked for Carlos Marcello. I believe he put all of the pieces together, the Cuban exiles, the CIA guys, and the mob, and he put the whole hit in Dealey Plaza together. I believe he was the real mastermind working on behalf of Louisiana Don Carlos Marcello. Now,
can we unpack? So I feel like we've skipped over the culminating event in this entire story, which is that Kennedy gets assassinated. Mm-hmm. The crime is pinned on Oswald, who's apparently in the Texas book repository where he works, and he takes this shot and is arrested, is killed by Jack Ruby. But what is the evidence for his involvement in the conspiracy with the exiles and the mob in advance of...
You're talking about Ruby or Oswald?
Well, Oswald. Did I say Ruby?
No, you said he. We need to see how Ruby's tied up in this too, because he's also interacting with Oswald, from what I understand.
Is he? So basically, from what I've read, Oswald was like kind of a weird character in the sense that he seemed like he was maybe a spy. Like there was some stuff where he was...
Well, he lived in the Soviet Union for some time, right? And then came back, and
yeah,
there's I think we're gonna have to unpack the details here.
Well, let's do Oswald and Ruby kind of together but separate. So just to finish with Ruby, so he's definitely talking to mobsters leading up to that. He's frantic when Oswald's taken into custody, and then he knows he needs to silence him. And right away, even like J. Edgar Hoover knew right away it's a mob hit. These guys did away with it. Publicly, he didn't say that. Privately, he did. He's like, okay, this was an obvious hit to silence a witness. We know what this is. Okay. So that said, Oswald, his part. So Oswald is a bit of a weird guy, but he's extremely intelligent. And Oswald, he was sort of like, I made a connection with somebody gave him The Idiot by Dostoevsky, like for one of his birthdays or something. And that's a guy who was kind of like, is it Lev Mishkin? It's years since I read it, but he was sort of like mistaken for an idiot, but he wasn't. He was a brilliant guy. I feel the same about Oswald. He joined the Marines at a young age. He was stationed at an air base in Japan where he had something to do with secret missions, secret U-2 flights and stuff. He was a brilliant guy in many ways. He had a couple of nervous breakdowns, which also goes together with being very smart. The smarter you are sometimes, the more you feel that you don't belong in this world. Where the hell do I belong? I'm not saying I'm brilliant or a genius, but the smarter I got when I was in prison, the more difficult it was. The more I read, the more enlightened I became, the more difficult it was to survive in there just within my own self. I'm ready to have a nervous breakdown every day. I want to talk about physics and astronomy, and I got a guy going, yo, you see this girl's boobs? I'm like, I'm like, so, and he's showing me a picture of a porn, so like, it's like, where do I go from here? So I feel like that kind of breakdowns could go with that. And he was having nervous breakdowns. He was definitely intelligent. He learned Russian like overnight. I was in prison for many, many years with Latin Americans, with Spanish, people who spoke Spanish. And I never picked up really Spanish, and I wish I did, but I didn't have the brain to pick up a language. I was in there one time where this guy came in and didn't know, never spoke Spanish, never heard it. Within like 3 or 4 months, he's going as fast as the Spanish, talking to them. And I'm going, I didn't think you knew Spanish. He goes, oh, I didn't. I learned it in here. He goes, don't you hear everything around you? I go, I hear it, but I'm not picking it up like that. So he had a brain for that. I don't. Oswald did. Oswald picked up Russian, no problem. They thought he was Russian, people, when he was in Russia, because he spoke it so well. So like, Oswald was like really, really intelligent. When he defects to Russia, it's odd because he comes home and he says, I'm disenchanted with Russian communism and I wanted to get home. Leninist, Marxist doesn't work for me, /Stalinist. And I'm done with it. I want to come home. The State Department not only allows him re-entry, but like pays for him to come home, and like underwrites his ticket, like it's almost like, I think I used an analogy in the book saying, it's like, you call your parents and you're like, yeah, I went on a hiking trip, through the Alps and I know you paid for it and everything, but my feet are killing me. Can you bring me home? Hiking isn't for me. Maybe I should have did the trains, and you're like, your parents are like, sure, no problem. We'll Western Union some money, or now Venmo it would be, or whatever, get home. Where that's how they welcomed Oswald. Like it was just a hiking trip that he felt like his feet hurt. Meanwhile, you're returning from defecting to the Soviet Union and you worked at an air base, a top secret air base in Japan. You'd think that they'd want to strap him to a chair and like figure out what the hell's going on. So that's all still hidden in the National Archives.
It is strange. It is very strange.
So now he suddenly shows up. He's originally from Louisiana /Texas. His mother growing up, he lived between Louisiana and parts of Texas. And he ends up back there and he took on a Russian wife. So he's back in the United States and, they're watching him, supposedly. CIA /FBI, both of them keeping an eye on him. But he's sort of like, look out for the document dump. She's still alive, so they may redact it. But there's a woman by the name of Ruth Paine, whose house Oswald was living in, him and his wife. And Ruth Paine, there's a lot of mystery about her, but she's kept her mouth shut. She's in old age now. I believe she's still alive. Last I looked a few months ago, she was, or a year ago. But Ruth Paine is a very mysterious character. Her husband worked for Bell Helicopter. He was very old money, the husband. He was with the CIA. He had connections to the CIA. I think she was part with the CIA. She ends up with Oswald, and she's like sort of his caretaker, like chaperone around Texas, taking care of Marina, his wife. So there's something, at one point or another, they said that they saw, they described a vehicle that was identical to Ruth Paine's vehicle, leaving the book's depository, taking other people away from it, people who look like Cubans or maybe Italians, who knows. They were darker skinned, and they took them away from the book depository. And when somebody confronted Oswald about it, he supposedly yelled, "You leave Ruth Paine out of it. She's a nice woman," but supposedly it was her car. We don't know for sure, but she pops up a lot. So Oswald is sort of like, he's dealing with this other guy who's a CIA sort of handler, who ends up killing himself mysteriously before the House Assassinations Committee calls him. That guy did like Oswald and felt like he may have been a patsy. So Oswald starts appearing in different places, like he's trying to get this Cuban visa leading up to the assassination. And he's desperately banging on the doors in Mexico of the Cuban embassy, the Russian embassy, and he can't get this Cuban visa. And then Hoover reviews, the FBI agents that review the file, they tell the CIA, look, my agents, Hoover says, this is on record. I quote it in the book. And my book is heavily sourced, so it's all in the back, where the sources come from, government sources or what have you. He said, look, my agents reviewed the tapes. They saw the pictures of this so-called Oswald, and they listened to the audio recordings. They said it's not him. So somebody's impersonating Oswald. That's coming from J. Edgar Hoover. Someone's impersonating Oswald, trying to get this Cuban visa. So that goes into what the conspiracy was really about. So we know the mob. Let's put them on the side for a minute. We know the mob wants to get rid of Bobby, and they've decided the best way is to kill Jack. So let's put them on the shelf for a minute. They're masterminding. They're in charge of the groundwork, let's say, the mob, right? Because the CIA is still at that time in their life, in their history, where they're going to keep their hands a little clean if they can. So the mob's going to take care of the dirty work in Dealey Plaza. So now you got I'm sorry, rewind 2 seconds. Where was I going to when I said put the mob on the shelf? I want to make sure.
We're dealing with the fact that Oswald, not Oswald, is in Mexico trying to get a visa at the consulate, and Hoover, and it's not him.
Yeah. So let's put the mob on the side for a minute. You could clip that out, I guess, right? Cool. So we'll put the mob on the side for a minute, and we know that they're going to do the dirty work, the groundwork, for whoever else is involved. So let's just put them on the shelf for a moment. So now, why is Oswald trying to get a visa or impersonating Oswald? Oh, I hit the mic. I'm sorry. I can start again. My apologies. Okay, cool. So let's put the mob on the shelf for a moment. They're involved, but it seems that they're going to be involved in the actual physical work that's going to be done in Dealey Plaza. They're going to put the conspiracy together. They're going to basically be doing the dirty work of the conspirators, the mob is, and they're masterminding it from the ground. That's their duty. That's their sort of like what they need to be doing. So if we put them on the shelf for a moment, we go back to Oswald. Why is somebody impersonating Oswald, according to J. Edgar Hoover? Why is someone impersonating Oswald in Cuba? In Mexico City, trying to get a Cuban visa? Well, what comes out later is right after Jack Ruby is arrested for killing Oswald and shutting him up, Jack Ruby's really relaxed and he's hanging out in the precinct. And, the reporters that are there are going, wow, this guy doesn't look like he's facing if he gets Oswald dies at Parkland Hospital, he's facing the electric chair. That's what like the penalty is if you can't beat it. Jack Ruby's hoping he could beat it, but he's not sure. So he's not sure. Oswald was taken away alive. He dies. He's declared dead at Parkland. So Ruby's just hanging out, waiting to hear. And they come in and they tell Ruby Oswald's dead, which means he's no longer facing attempted murder. He's facing murder. So it's worse for him. Usually a guy, wants to make sure that the guy didn't die unless it's a really big vendetta. You're hoping that you just maybe reacted a little spontaneously. Hopefully this guy lives and I'm just facing attempted murder. Well, he's now facing murder. And he's thrilled about it. He's like, he's dead? That's great. And the reporter couldn't believe it. He's like, I can't believe this guy's happy. And he goes, now we'll invade Cuba. Now we'll get Cuba back. So this is a little too geopolitical for me for a topless bar owner. Now we'll get Cuba back? You're a topless bar owner who hangs out with the mob. What do you know about getting Cuba back? This is geopolitics. Like if you hear Henry Kissinger say, now we'll get Cuba back. Okay, it makes sense. But if you hear Henry Kissinger go, now we'll whack the guy, it's a little off. Something's wrong, right? Well, that's what Ruby's doing. He's talking like Henry Kissinger. So something's up now. So the theory that I feel is the strongest, that I believe is what happened, is the idea was that if Oswald looks like a communist, leftist, Marxist Castro lover and is trying to get access to Cuba and then is pinned with the murder of Jack Kennedy, then the American public will demand an invasion of the island. And that's how the idea was supposed to unravel. They couldn't get it in the Bay of Pigs, the CIA handlers and the Cuban exiles, who were both involved in the conspiracy with the mob. They couldn't get it during the missile crisis. But Kennedy's a lot easier to kill. We get rid of somebody who we think is committing treason against the United States with Khrushchev. We get rid of somebody who we believe is far too permissive of left-wing politics and Marxist politics. And not only that, but we get an invasion of the island out of it. And this is a win-win. So I think that's the reason why Oswald was supposed to get away, by the way, I think, and disappear.
So Oswald is at the time of the assassination going to be painted in the media as being a Marxist Cuban who killed Kennedy on behalf of Castro?
Correct. So leading up to besides his supposedly someone was impersonating him, in Mexico City, there are images, videos of Oswald handing out pro-Castro literature in Louisiana. Now, the guy who he was handing it out for was a guy by the name of Guy Bannister, who's a complete right-wing fanatic, ex-retired FBI agent. So the secretary of Guy Bannister says, "Hey, did you see Oswald, who hangs out in our office all day, by the way? He's handing out this crazy lefty stuff on the corner. And, Marxist, communists love Castro stuff. What the heck's going on with that?" And Guy Bannister famously tells her, "Don't worry about it. He's our guy." So they're planning this and they're filming him as he's doing it. So they're definitely creating this idea that he's a rabid communist, like he's like the guy. But oddly enough, David Ferry is a complete right-wing extremist who he hangs out with every day. Guy Bannister is a right-wing extremist who he hangs out with every day. And what are they doing with Oswald, who's a communist, unless he's pretending to be a communist, which is obviously, to me, what he was doing and exactly what he was doing when he defected to Russia. And the reason why, if he wasn't pretending, the State Department would not have welcomed him back with open arms and found a home for him and given him like a $325 check or whatever to help him get situated and get home.
Oh gosh, I have so many questions. But before we get past Ruby, was Ruby interacting with Oswald prior to the assassination?
There is evidence, and it's not photographic evidence. However, so there's evidence that Ruby was interacting with Oswald, that they were seen together, that they were introduced to people together, that Ruby had introduced, in one of his topless bars, Ruby had introduced Oswald as, "This is Lee from the CIA."
Whoa.
Yeah, very interesting. So somehow he's being manipulated, this Oswald guy, maybe working for different people, State Department, Naval Intelligence, CIA. I think he's in over his head, smart as he was.
I mean, so there's two prongs here. One is like, did Oswald realize what part he was playing in this? But the other one still with Ruby is like, I still don't totally grasp why Ruby was willing to put his life on the line. Like, why was he like, do you think he was in charge of the groundwork at Dealey Plaza?
He was definitely part of the conspiracy, whether it be like liaising with the police. You needed the police. You needed dirty cops in Dealey Plaza. And you needed, there are cops days before who saw people running a mock drill with rifles on the grassy knoll. And they ran up the hill and chased them away, but never reported it. You forgot to mention that there are these guys running a mock drill on the grassy knoll days before the motorcade comes. I mean, so Ruby's got something to do with the mob. He's going back and forth with the Marcelo Borgata, the Campisi. He eats with Joe Campisi, the underboss of the Texas Mafia, a steak dinner the night before the assassination. And when he's arrested for shooting Oswald, who comes to visit him in jail? The underboss of the Texas Mafia, Joe Campisi. Whoever visits you in jail is who's worried about what you're going to say. I've been in jail. They send guys up to talk to you. They want to feel you out. I know what they're doing. I never snitched. I never informed on nobody. But I'm not an idiot. I know when people come up to talk to me, somebody's going, "Go see Louis. See how he's doing in there." People are worried about their own ass. So Campisi goes up to talk to Ruby. Must have put his mind at ease. And guess who told Campisi Ruby wants to talk to you and come up as soon as possible? Sheriff Decker, who's head of the jail and who's in the mob's pocket. He's an ex-bootlegger. So the whole place is like really totally like in bed with the mob, totally corrupt. Ruby's got something to do leading up to the assassination. Now, when you asked, is there evidence that Ruby and Oswald were seen together? No, not yet. However, people said that Ruby was seen with David Ferry, and the historians who defend the narrative that, this is all just Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone nut gunman. They used to say, there's no evidence of that. It never happened. He never knew him. And then suddenly a picture surfaced of when David Ferry controlled was a pilot for the Civil Air Guard, rather, and Oswald was a cadet, and they're in the same picture together. They knew each other from way back when.
Oh, remind me who David Ferry is again.
David Ferry is an interesting character, and I should give you a little background on him. He's a bit of super eccentric man, and he's involved with. He hates Castro. He's a he's a right-wing extremist, anti-Marxist, anti-communist, who also has worked with the CIA to run sabotage missions over Cuba because he was a pilot. David Ferry was. He was a pilot for a major airline, and he also flew his own private planes, and he was very close with the Cuban exiles. So Ferry, at one point or another, while Bobby Kennedy is trying to deport and prosecute Carlos Marcello, the Mafia Don of Louisiana, Marcello hires David Ferry to do his legal research and become a little bit of a private investigator for him. And suddenly Marcello is constantly seen with Ferry, who is known by the Cuban community as the master of intrigue, because he's constantly running these training camps to take back Cuba. He's always seen in these olive green fatigues with a rifle, and he's training these Cubans, and they all hang out, the Cubans and Ferry, at Guy Bannister's office in Louisiana, who is this also right-wing, very, very hard right. And by the way, too, they use the term lightly now, right-wing. Everybody's a right-wing extremist today. Like, I think it's ridiculously used today, very loosely. But these guys were real right-wing extremists in every sense of the word. If you go back in history, there's a guy who may have been involved. He predicted Kennedy's death before it happened. He was a super right-wing extremist who burned black churches in the South. That's a real right-wing extremist if you burn churches in the South. I mean, that's as far as you could go. Young girls were killed. That's like super duper. And he said Kennedy's going to buy it when he comes down south. This was on tape. There's a recording of it. And the other guy goes, how? From how? How? He goes with a high-powered rifle from a high building. This was known months before. Nobody, and this guy was supposedly connected somehow. Ferry was connected to people, and Marcello put $1 million price tag on Kennedy's head. He said anybody who takes him out, I'll give $1 million to. And I think he could have gave $100 million. In the end, who knows how much he paid who? But Marcello was willing to pay anybody. And apparently, right-wing extremists who hated Kennedy and felt he was too easy with the civil rights stuff, they might have picked up the contract too. I don't know who the shooters were in Dealey Plaza. I couldn't find evidence one way or another of who the actual shooters were. But I do know who the conspirators were. That's blatant. And there's enough evidence you could have took it to trial 1 million times already and convicted them. I know the law. I've been prosecuted, and I defended myself, and I studied the law. And there's a great case that could have been brought time and time again against the conspirators and never was.
So the legal standard for conviction is beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Mm-hmm. And so with a lot of this stuff, it seems like it's scattered through like private or tapes of private conversations, these little snippets that you've had to dig up. Is there, do you think, enough evidence that has a proper chain of evidence? Or sorry, proper chain. What's the?
Chain of custody of evidence?
Proper chain of custody that like it hasn't been tampered with. That you think that if it did go to trial, that there would be a clear path towards actually being able to resolve this. Like I imagine most of these people are dead, and so there's nobody actually to convict anymore.
Yeah, there won't be a trial now.
But like, definitely. If we were to go like with all of the information that you've pulled together, and we were to go back in time, and it's 5 years after the assassination. Do you think that it's unambiguously possible to convict somebody?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that specifically, and first I'm going to give you a little insight into somebody who did try. So Jim Garrison, who was the focus of the Oliver Stone movie JFK, Jim Garrison was played by Kevin Costner. The real life Jim Garrison was an excellent prosecutor in Louisiana. However, however, he was in Marcello's pocket, and I show that in the book. So Garrison does try to prosecute a case. He sits down one night and he reads not only the 888-page final report of the Warren Commission, but all the volumes, 26 volumes or 28 volumes. He reads them all. And he comes away with the conclusion that there was a massive cover-up, a conspiracy here. So he wants to prosecute. So he starts grabbing people. He grabs David Ferry and he goes after this guy, Eladio Del Val. So the initial knee-jerk reaction to people who were questioning Garrison is like, okay, he's saying it's rogue CIA agents working with their CIA contract agents. However, why doesn't he look at the mob? Like he's got a blatant evidence being in Louisiana that the mob and Marcello had something to do with it too. But it turns out that Garrison was in the mob's pocket. So the mob, at one point, an attorney said to Marcello, hey, you heard Jim Garrison's poking around with this whole JFK stuff, right? He goes, yeah. He goes, are you nervous about it? He goes, nothing to be nervous about. He goes, he's my guy. He goes, don't sweat it. Nothing to be thinking about. And then Jim Garrison goes out with Marcello's brothers all the time. And then the United States government eventually brings a case against Garrison because they're mad that he's going after the CIA. And they prove that he was in bed with the mob. He was acquitted in court, but they did show an abundance of evidence that showed he did get kickbacks and stuff. I shouldn't say they proved it. He was acquitted in court twice. But it seems that they went after him only because he had the nerve to shake a tree that they didn't want shaken on the government side. So it was tried. So when he finally goes to court, he wants to bring David Ferry to trial. He wants to bring this guy, Eladio Del Val, to trial. Well, David Ferry is being kept at the Fontainebleau in Louisiana hotel. And mysteriously, whoever's watching him, because he's in protective custody, as soon as he's arrested, he goes, you just killed me. Ferry goes, I'm dead. I'm a dead man walking. And he goes, well, let's talk. So they put him up at this hotel. We'll put you in protective custody. And suddenly Ferry just leaves. The guy who's watching him stopped watching him. It's supposed to be watched by Garrison's guy. And then he's found at his house dead. And they said it's a suicide, and there's 2 suicide notes, but they said it's an embolism in the back of his brain. Or I'm going, whoa, or neck or brain. I go, whoa, wait a second. How did he know he was going to have an embolism, that he wrote 2 suicide notes? Nobody ever asked that in any of the books I read. I mean, like, oh, yeah, I'm starting to feel a little pain in my neck. Honey, get me a pen and paper. I want to write a suicide note. I mean, hello? So this is like ridiculous to me. So what happened? Why did Garrison lose touch with him? Why did Garrison pull his protective custody off him? Why did he feel not safe at the Fontainebleau under Garrison's guise? And why did he run home and end up dead? Well, then they go looking for his counterpart, Eladio Del Val, in Florida. They found him in a shopping center in Florida, in Miami, with an axe wound in the middle of his head and a bullet hole in his heart. So the 2 guys Garrison went looking for that were crucial to the conspiracy are suddenly dead. And Garrison's case now goes to trial, and it rests on this guy, Clay Shaw, who pretty much might have known something, but didn't really, not sure what his involvement was, but the evidence was very tenuous. And Garrison goes, I'm taking it to trial. I want to show the Zapruder film, which nobody's ever seen. And by the way, incidentally, the Zapruder film was immediately snatched up by Luce, the owner of Time Magazine and all the, the corporate media mogul, Henry Luce. He buys it for, I think, $150,000.
Who's like famously really good buddies with Dulles, right?
Exactly. Not only is he buddies with both Dulleses, John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State who passed, and Allen Dulles, but he buys it and he buries it. How do you bury the Zapruder film? Aren't you the media? Aren't you supposed to show us the film? You bought it and buried it?
And if I remember correctly from the Devil's Chessboards, they also hated Kennedy with a passion.
Hated him.
Like in this like really irrational, just absolute, I think because of Cuba.
Cuba, that's correct. And they took a hard line against Kennedy. They lightened up on him at times. It was it was also at the forefront was Luce's, it was either his girlfriend or his wife. Gosh, I did the research on Luce years ago, and he doesn't play a crucial role in my book. It's just a quick mention because of the Zapruder film. But Garrison does then show the Zapruder film to the jury. We don't see it till after that, much after, but he shows it to the jury, and the jury walks away. They acquit Clay Shaw because there was no real evidence against Clay Shaw. It was just basically a drama show for Garrison to show the public that something happened. But the jury was 100% convinced that there was a conspiracy to kill the president.
Just off the Zapruder film, you think? Or this was the magic bullet argument was brought in and everything?
No, all of the evidence that so Garrison introduced a lot of evidence that basically he introduced evidence that the deceased David Ferry was at a party with a bunch of Cuban exiles and a couple of other guys. And one of the guys came forward and they tried to trash the guy and say he's gay, he's on drugs. And they tried back then, as I said, being gay was something that you couldn't come out of the closet so easily. You were smeared. And they tried to say, well, he's a gay drug addict. Don't listen to him. But the guy was sharp as nails. He was an extremely intelligent man. He knew exactly what he was talking about. I read all the stuff he said. I read articles about when he was quoted. I read government documents. He was far from an idiot. And they tried to say he was. So he was at a party where David Ferry said, let's forget Castro. Let's forget killing Castro. We need to kill Kennedy. And how we're going to do it is we're going to lure him into a place, and it's going to be a triangulation we're going to get him in a place where there's a triangulation of fire where he can't escape it. So we got to get him in a kill zone, and we're going to hit him from high up with a triangulation of fire. So we know, if you watch the Zapruder film, contrary to when they try to make us think that our lion eyes don't know what we're seeing, Kennedy's head goes back into the left. That's consistent with a shot from his front right. But the government told us, no, you're crazy. It's from Oswald's shot. And we all nod along and go, oh, okay. The Texas Pool Book Depository made his head do that. There's brain matter that blew out of Kennedy's head and hit a motorcycle cop directly behind him on the left, off the left rear fender. How does he get blown with brain matter if the shot came from the Texas School Book Depository? How does the cop over there get hit with brain matter? Because the shot came this way, blew Kennedy's brains out, and the brain matter hit the cop consistent with a shot from the grassy knoll. And we all watched the Zapruder film time and again, and we nod like sheep because the government and their paid journalists tell us that we're crazy and it's a shot from behind and Oswald did it. There's absolutely no way that Zapruder film shows that. And we question ourselves like idiots for 60 years now. I'm sorry I get worked up about this because the evidence is in front of us.
Well, what's crazy is I don't think that anybody buys it.
This is what's crazy.
Yes.
Is that there were two books written around the same time that were the history of the CIA. One was Talbot's Devil's Chessboard, which is a biography of Dulles. And the other one was written by, I think, a current New York Times reporter called A Legacy of Ashes. And I can't remember the reporter's name. And Talbot goes through and he makes this case that Dulles was intimately involved. He touches on the mob a little bit, but he's mainly focused on Dulles. Mm-hmm. And the guy who writes The Legacy of Ashes is basically like, anybody who tells you that it's anything other than Oswald is full of shit. Mm-hmm. And that to me is astounding because this is a guy who's representative of the paper of record, who is writing this apparently, tell-all history of the CIA, and he's like, CIA wasn't involved, absolutely not, no evidence of that, anybody who tells you that is full of shit. And I think that it's the equivalent of taking the US bombers and painting them with Cuban colors and trying to make the story that, oh look, it's the Cuban ones. It's like, it's close enough that if you glance at it and you're not paying a lot of attention, it has the right shape to it, and so you can just move on with your life. And the people who spend time thinking about it and asking the question of, okay, well, what actually happened, are labeled as conspiracy theorists, weirdos, antisocial, like quasi-schizophrenics. I don't know if you've ever watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but there's this, it's a comedy of assholes, but there's this one character named Charlie who is in the midst of trying to page out this like massive conspiracy theory. And he's, this like kind of small trollish dude. And he's just in a room with all of these papers on the walls with like strings drawn between them. And he's like trying to explain all of these relationships. And that's the quintessential image of the person obsessed with any kind of dark, shadowy stuff that the government has done. Somebody that's easy to dismiss, somebody who's kind of fringe, weird, spittily, just preoccupied with things that no rational or sane person will care about.
I totally agree. Yeah, I so agree. And then
But it's not just the Zapruder film, right? There's also just all these bizarre inconsistencies. Like the shots don't line up. Famously, there's not enough. Like you have to have a bullet bounce all over the place, and then there's a like basically unscathed bullet found on the gurney later. Like there's just all of this wacky stuff that even on a surface level overview just doesn't add up to a single shooter.
I'm glad you brought up the bullet. So this is a crucial piece of evidence. And as you said, if we built a case, right? Crucial piece of evidence, the bullet. So there's too many bullets fired in too short a time for Oswald with a bolt action rifle to have fired them all. So they're faced with this problem, the Warren Commission is, whose job is to cover up the assassination. They're being fed the evidence by Hoover, who's covering it up. Hoover doesn't want everybody to know, by the way, that he saw this coming miles away. He was listening to everything. So Hoover's got every reason to lie. Allen Dulles finds himself the outed Allen Dulles, who Kennedy despised and made him leave the CIA. Well, gee, he finds himself in a premier spot on the Warren Commission. Okay, that makes sense. Oh, great. Okay, so now they have a problem now. So Oswald couldn't have gotten off all these shots with a bolt-action rifle. Forget about the Zapruder film, and we don't know about that yet, right? That comes out later, but let's just go with the bullets. Too many bullets fired in too short a period of time. Okay, so they come up with this thing called the single bullet theory, which we now know as the magic bullet theory. And the single bullet theory says that one of the bullets that went through Kennedy's throat from behind, they say, came out of his throat, then entered Governor Connolly, who was in front of Kennedy, hit him in the back, hit him in the lung, nicked two ribs, made a left turn, a right turn, a down turn, an up turn, came out, banged into his wrist, hit a seat, fell off, and landed on somehow at Parkland Hospital, absolutely brand new, as if it was just purchased from a gun store, laying on a gurney. Okay, great. Okay, so now let's talk about the witnesses and the people, let's say the victim. What does Governor Connolly think of the single bullet theory? He said it's absolutely absurd. I don't care how many tests they run. They'll never run enough tests to prove to me that that bullet that went in John Kennedy's neck, his throat, hit me. There's no way. It did not happen. I promise you it didn't happen. Never happened. Now there's Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, Vice President of the United States, is asked. Somebody from the Warren Commission who doesn't believe it also calls up Johnson and says, I don't believe it. And he says, either do I. And Johnson was only a couple of cars back. He goes, there's no way. This is Johnson. So there's people who were there and someone who was shot telling you it didn't happen. So what happens? The entire 888 page, I think, Warren report is a work of fiction. If you take away the single bullet theory, the entire report was for nothing, for naught. Throw it in the garbage. It doesn't work anymore. It's all about Oswald being a lone nut. But if there's no single bullet / magic bullet, then the whole theory that the Warren Commission spent 26 or 28 volumes to convince us and an 880-something page report to convince us is a bigger work of fiction than, as I said in the book, War and Peace. And I think Tolstoy was much more factual when he talked about the invasion, the Napoleonic invasion of Russia. So we got nothing but trash in the Warren report, and it all falls apart around the single bullet theory. Now, we could continue to go with a million other bits and pieces of evidence that don't hold up, but just that alone, and the whole thing implodes.
I want to leave I want there to be enough meat for people to go and read the book. And so I think that what are you going to, I really want to do two things before we wrap this conversation. One of which is deal with Bobby.
I don't think we'll be able to in this single conversation.
Because
there's so much.
You don't
here.
think so?
I mean, I didn't get a chance to read the Bobby Kennedy assassination. Do you get into the Bobby Kennedy assassination at the end of the book?
I've read books about it. I didn't do a deep dive.
Okay.
Writing about it. I do talk about it very briefly and how it affects Look, I think there's a lot of evidence that he was shot. Apparently, there was a shot inches from his ear, behind his ear. And they're saying Sirhan fired from the front. So there's a little bit of a problem with that. That much I know. Also, too, they were doing those mind control experiments at the time. And now, decades later, Sirhan still says it's all black to me. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you what I did that day. Don't know. So I think Sirhan might have been used as a tool or a pawn or a patsy like Oswald. There's also an interesting thing. One of the guys who was pulled out of the Dow Tex building, which is adjacent to the school book depository, a cop arrested him in that building. His name is Eugene Hale Brading. Leading up to the assassination, he was in communication with Ferry. He stayed at a hotel where Ruby visited the night before. After he left Joe Campisi, after having a steak dinner, he went to this hotel. And at that hotel was Eugene Hale Brading. Eugene Hale Brading, leading up to the assassination, changes his California license to a different name and asks his probation officer if it's okay to go to Texas for some oil business. They grant him permission. A cop, right after the shots are fired in Dealey Plaza, arrests him inside the Dow Tex building. They tried to twist that and say he was not in the building. I show evidence in my book that he was in the building. He tried to then say I was just going in there to make a phone call. So he's mysteriously in that building. And then he disappears from the scene again. And he meets up with Ferry, who he left Louisiana. Ferry was at a trial with Marcello. Marcello was acquitted at trial. Ferry leaves that trial when he hears Oswald is arrested in Texas, and he flies through a thunderstorm in the middle of the night to get to Texas for crisis management. So that's a whole different story. But so basically, Eugene Hale Brading is a mysterious character who happens to be a block away when Bobby Kennedy is killed. So that's another little bit of a irony that I haven't been able to figure out, that may come out one day. So I believe something happened. What I did put in the book was something that's interesting. John Ehrlichman left us a bit of evidence that's very, very interesting. When he was in a hotel room with Richard Nixon when Bobby announced his candidacy for the Democratic nomination for president. And Ehrlichman said, Nixon stared at the television screen, just blank-faced, poker-faced, and he just sat there staring, and then the segment moved on, and he just sat there continuing to stare at the screen. And at some point, Ehrlichman either snapped him out of it or he did on his own, and he said he just released some of the most demonic or evil forces that you could ever imagine, he said. So that's Nixon talking about Bobby just saying, I'm running for the president. And what was meant by that, how heavy it was, we can only imagine. Nixon was certainly in the know. Nixon was mysteriously in Texas also too, during the assassination, and flying home supposedly when he claims he heard about it, but there's some inconsistencies with his statement. He was at supposedly a Coca-Cola thing or something to do with something corporate. Other people were there. I didn't put all of this in the book because if I don't have evidence, I wanted to just sift through the stuff that I felt if I was a prosecutor, I could bring to trial. And I did that. I looked at my book, having spent so many years in courtrooms as a defendant and as a pro se attorney representing myself and other inmates who I've gotten relief for in the courts. I wanted to approach this as a prosecutor. And that's what I did. So things that the jury didn't need to hear or my readers don't need to hear, I sort of had to sift through. Otherwise it would be a 10,000 page book. I wanted to just basically build a case. And I promise you, the case that put me in jail, there was no physical evidence against me. I got away with every heist and hijacking I ever committed. I had the hearsay of a witness that put me in jail. And under federal statute, that's fine. If you put him on the stand. I remember the first witness who testified against me. I said to William Kunstler, I go, they just called that testimony. That was just a guy talking. He goes, that's testimony. I go, but he's lying. He goes, that's what they consider testimony in a courtroom. I go, you got to be kidding me. That didn't strike me as. Another thing, let me tell you something that the FBI does that should be changed. The FBI does these things called 302s. So let's say you two need to be interviewed by the FBI for whatever reason. What they do is they don't tape. They're not under the same guidelines as state or county where they need to tape you in a room. We all watch video interrogations, right? We've all seen them on YouTube or documentaries. It's very common. It's a video interrogation. The cops, you need to know that the police aren't twisting arms. They're not threatening people. This is how our society works. Yet the FBI, for some reason, has been immune from that. And they just basically created 302 so they could interview both of you and then write what the two of you said, their best interpretation of it. And that goes into the record as your testimony. So there are people who were witnesses in Dealey Plaza who said, I read the FBI report, but I didn't say anything like that. I don't know what they're talking about. So you would think that's 1963. We've done away with that a long time ago, right? 2025 still exists.
That's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying.
Terrifying.
Don't talk to the law enforcement, I think, is the bottom line of that.
I did want to inquire if you had any sense about whether Oswald understood his role in all of this, because, you know, it's kind of strange how after the assassination, Oswald famously goes to a movie theater and he's arrested by a street cop, and there's this whole chase scene that ensues, and it just seems he doesn't totally act like someone who's just assassinated a president. It's very strange.
Yeah, I think as far as the his understanding of his role, which is an excellent question, because he's this crucial figure for so long. And when my whole life, I always thought that he fired the shot from the school book depository. And when someone told me that he may not have even fired a shot, I was like, you got to be kidding me. This person's whacked. You know, like, are you crazy? And the more evidence that I sifted through over 10 years of research, I came away wondering if he fired a shot. I don't even know if he fired a shot. Now, having said that, was he part of the conspiracy? It seems that he was to some degree, because he was around all of the conspirators. So yeah, he was in the know. He seems to have been in the know. I don't think that he realized that he was going to be the patsy and they were going to dump it on him. So it's almost like if, let's say me and my crew, we're doing this big heist. And I got like 5 or 6 crew members coming with me, let's say 6. And we go there and we pull it off, but I need someone to take the fall. You know, I gotta leave somebody behind. And the rest of us decide, maybe, or 2 or 3 of us decide without everyone knowing, that we're going to dump it on Joey or something. And we're just going to kill him at the site so the cops have somebody to blame it on. And, you know, but Joey's totally unaware. He thinks he's part of this conspiracy. And, you know, so I think I don't know if he knew it was going to happen that day. I don't know if he knew it was definitely going to happen. I don't know how much he was privy to, but he was definitely with all of the conspirators. He got mysteriously, I mentioned Ruth Paine's name. She mysteriously got him a job at the book depository at the last minute, overlooking the motorcade route, which was interesting because he was looking for a job, and then he lands this job. So did they put him there? He realized it maybe when the shots rang out and he got picked up. Also, too, there's a J.D. Tippett who he's accused of shooting. He may have. There's evidence. There's witnesses who say he didn't, witnesses who say he did. We don't know. But if maybe J.D. Tippett's job was to shoot Oswald, the fleeing presidential assassin, and maybe Oswald kind of spotted it and got the jump on him first and shot Tippett first. So Oswald was maybe reacting when he shot Tippett, and maybe Tippett was going to go down as sort of like the hero cop, but maybe he was really in Ruby's pocket. I don't know. We don't have evidence for this. I speculate on that, but from the best of what I've read. So he was definitely caught. He was definitely like dumbfounded by what the hell's going on. They dumped it on me. And I also go in the book, this is very interesting. So they leading up to the assassination, there was a guy by the name of Thomas Arthur Valley. And I mentioned him in the book, and I ran a picture of him in the book. Thomas Arthur Valley was in Chicago, and he's also a former Marine, sort of like working with intelligence and Cuban exiles, little bit nuts, sort of like already labeled a nut. We don't know if he was or he wasn't, but labeled a nut. And he mysteriously got a job in a printing building overlooking Kennedy's upcoming motorcade route in Chicago. And somebody by the name of quote unquote Lee called the Secret Service in Chicago and said, hey, something's happening there. You better look into this guy. And apparently they pulled the plug on it. Kennedy ended up not going to Chicago, but they did pull the plug on it before. Kennedy he canceled his trip to Chicago because the leader of Vietnam was murdered, and Kennedy saw it as a geopolitical crisis, so he canceled it at the last minute. But Kennedy had every intention to go to Chicago and do a motorcade through the city, and there was going to be a sharp turn like the one on Elm Street, right in front of this building where Thomas Arthur Valley rather, had just gotten a job too. So he mysteriously appears in Chicago. So what I thought was that once they had it planned, first in Miami, where that right-wing guy who burned down churches, that extreme racist who burned down churches in Alabama and killed young African-American girls, first it was supposed to happen there in Miami. He gets caught, that guy in Miami, talking about it. We're going to get Kennedy with a high-powered rifle. He comes down south, and he's going to buy it, and we're going to make some lunatic look like he did it, he said. He said all that. It's all in the transcript in my book. So now it's off the table in Miami. Secret Service, police, stop it. Now it's supposed to happen in Chicago. There's 3 places, by the way, that happen to all be, nobody made this connection before but me. They happen to all be cities run by Sam Giancana, Chicago, Santo Trafficante, Florida, and Carlos Marcello controls Texas. The 3 mob bosses who are probably involved, every indication, are the 3 cities where Kennedy's going to buy it. So it's off the table in Miami. It's off the table in Chicago when Thomas Arthur Valley gets pulled in. And also, too, what's interesting is they raided an apartment where there were high-powered rifles and pictures and stuff on the walls that were consistent with guys who were looking to kill Kennedy. And apparently 2 of the 4 guys who were supposed to line the motorcade route there in Chicago were taken into custody, questioned, and we have no record of that questioning and who they were to this day. So that's a little odd too. So now it's off the table in Chicago. It's got to happen in Dealey Plaza. Dallas is the last stop, and the mob knows they got to hit him in Dallas, and it goes off flawlessly in Dallas. And I think that Oswald was, as I said, he was hobnobbing with the conspirators. There's evidence that he was connected with not only witnesses, but a photograph eventually surfaces that he's connected with David Ferry, who's Carlos Marcello's right-hand guy. There's also he's also in bed with Guy Bannister, who after the assassination was accused of killing Kennedy by some private investigator, who Bannister responded by pistol whipping him into a bloody mess and sending him to the hospital and said, don't ever say that again. And so that's famously in the JFK movie, I think, by Oliver Stone. But it really happened. So Oswald is connected to all the major players. There are people who said he was with Ruby. He's definitely something's oddly, somebody's impersonating him in Cuba. He's oddly given a pass back after defecting. The State Department Naval Intelligence is sort of like giving him a pass for some reason. So he's a hot tamale, to put it, as best as I can for somebody who had a burrito for lunch. He's a hot tamale. And what are we going to do? At this point, they dump it on him. And what is Oswald going to do but plead his innocence? And at some point, I think he was talking now in that room. And I think Oswald got word that he was saying too much or insinuating too much.
Ruby, yeah.
Ruby. And Ruby knew he had to shut him up. And Ruby knew his life was on the line if he didn't. Either the mob's going to kill Ruby or Ruby's going to go down for the assassination of John F. Kennedy, one way or the other. Ruby begged, at one point I talk about it in my book, when the Warren Commission was investigating their phony investigation, Ruby demanded that they come see him. So they came to see him and he goes, look, I can't talk in this jail. The mob controlled the sheriff who ran the jail. So he goes, I'll be dead tomorrow. Bring me to Washington. I'll tell you everything you want to know. Bring me to Washington. 8 consecutive times he asked Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, swore Kennedy in as an inauguration and was head of the Warren Commission. 8 consecutive times he asked Chief Justice Earl Warren, begged him to please take me back to Washington, and 8 times Chief Justice Earl Warren said no. And the reason he said later was, Ruby said I was used for a purpose. Take me back to Washington, I'll tell you what the purpose was. So Chief Justice Warren never asked him what the purpose was. Why don't you tell me now, Ruby? Isn't curious as to what that purpose was, and doesn't take him to Washington, and later says it's because he was just trying to get a free flight to Washington. I think the American taxpayers would have been quite fine with paying an economy class ticket for Jack Ruby to come to Washington. and even a Motel 8. Okay, I mean, really, it's BS. And they did not want to hear what Ruby had to say. And by then, Ruby was, on death's door, probably he's feeling sick. Eventually, comes down with cancer, but he wants to talk. He wants to tell people his story. He feels like he's been used. He's facing the electric chair. He got an appeal. Never got to. He did win his appeal, by the way, but he never got to trial. And by the way, I think we touched upon it earlier. The CIA was involved with David Ferry. David Ferry used to do these cancer experiments in his apartment. David Ferry being the master of intrigue, who may have been behind this whole thing. He worked for the CIA, but he also used to do these. He used to implant tumors in mice to see if he could kill them, and he was trying to develop some type of cancer research. And the CIA at the same time wanted to kill people where it looked like it would be a natural death. So, and then Ruby dies of cancer, and when he's dying of cancer, he's saying, "This doctor who kept coming to see me was injecting me with stuff that I didn't like," and I felt weird. Yeah. So we don't have evidence of that, like hard concrete evidence, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that something was, at least Ruby believes something happened to him and something was done to him. And we do know that there is evidence of Ferry running a cancer/mice lab out of his own apartment. And there's also evidence that the CIA was looking to kill people in ways that would look natural through Dr. Gottlieb, who I talk about at length in the book.
That's absolutely crazy.
There's so much
Yeah.
there.
Okay, so
Can I ask just like one tiny little question about the Oswald fleeing the scene business? Like, in the event that Oswald didn't fire a shot, do you think that as soon as shots were fired, he realized he was being framed for it? Or do you think he didn't realize it until he gets in the shootout with the local, what's his name, Tippett?
Yeah, J.D. Tippett. At some point, he may have realized it, because not right away, though, because when the majority of the police ran up the grassy knoll. The majority of the witnesses said the shots came from the grassy knoll. I think there were like 2/3 of the witnesses said the grassy knoll. Then there was another segment of the witnesses that said the book depository. So we assume it was a triangulation of fire at least 2 places, if not 3. So at least school book depository, if not maybe also the Dow Tex building, and some people say the overpass, but we know the grassy knoll. Okay. So the cops that ran into the school book depository, one of them passed Ruby, who was like sipping a soda in a lunchroom, which was
You mean Oswald? Sorry, I'm sorry.
Oswald. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Oswald. Yep, I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me. He passes Oswald, and Oswald's like calm as could be, sipping a soda that he just got out of the machine in the cafeteria. He's not running. He's not huffing and puffing. And there's a sort of like, people have said, there's no way he could have got from the perch in the window to that place in that amount of time. And if one chance in a million, he's, a speed demon without huffing and puffing and sweating. He's like calm as could be. And this is only seconds after. So at some point he realizes, I guess, I got to get out of this building. Something spooked him. And, he's in the know. So I don't know when he realizes that I need to go too. I need to get the hell out of here. Maybe he was calm enough for the cop to leave. And once the cop got past him, he says, "Okay, I'm with these guys who did this, even though I didn't just do it. They could pin it on me. I got to get the hell out of here." So he leaves. And then, now he went back to his apartment first. And at some point, the landlady there said that a patrol car came by and was beeping the horn to like get his attention, and he didn't come out. Then the patrol car left. So that's a little odd too. Like, why were the cops looking for Oswald at his apartment? So that's a little weird too. I just want to say one other thing too that nobody's really said, and this may be a crucial piece of the puzzle that you guys are going to hear first, other than in my book. But I haven't mentioned this on podcasts, and it's really important. I haven't gotten into details with it, and it's really interesting. Everybody's always pointed the finger at the CIA, and the CIA, I do believe, had something to do with it to some extent. Rogue agents of the CIA. I do not know. Dulles, you can't say was CIA. He was outed. So ex-CIA, possibly, maybe Dulles. John McCone, I believe, was innocent. He's the guy that went to Hickory Hill, where Bobby was in McLean, Virginia, when he got news of John Kennedy's death. And Bobby asked McCone point blank, "Did you kill my brother?" Meaning the CIA. And McCone said, "I swear I didn't." But there's been testimony from Richard Helms and other people who said, "We didn't tell anything to McCone. McCone was totally in the dark. We thought it was not advisable to fill him in on what we were doing." So that's like rogue CIA agents within the CIA at the time not telling their superior what the hell they're up to. And that's with other things. So McCone would be in the dark. So McCone's got nothing to do with it. Dulles, I don't know. Rogue agents, I don't know. Somebody's in the CIA's got something to do with something because they despised Kennedy, and it looks like they're working with the mob. It looks like I can't put a finger on one person other than contract agents for the CIA like David Ferry, who really was, and he's definitely involved. So that said, there are a number of things that, and I really want to talk about this because it's so important. There are a number of things that happened on the day of the assassination that I believe point the finger at the Secret Service. And this is incredibly important because everybody keeps overlooking the Secret Service. Now, we always know that there's a heroic Secret Service agent who courageously jumped on the trunk of the car and tried to get there to help the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy. We understand that. He was heroic. I believe the agents on the ground were extremely heroic. And for all of their faults and mistakes, I do believe they were patriotic and not involved in a conspiracy. Having said that, there is somebody up high, and I'll tell you what happens. There's an agent in charge of the Secret Service on the ground in Dallas. His name is Forrest Searles. He's been there forever. Winston Lawson is sent from Washington as an advance team to lay out the motorcade route for the Secret Service, and he links up with Searles. So Winston Lawson now is making changes to the motorcade route, last-minute changes that are very interesting. Let me go through them with you. He wants the bubble top removed from Kennedy's limousine. That's the first thing. Okay, there's no rain out. The rain stopped. The sun is shining. We could live with that. Bubble top comes off. Kennedy wants to be seen, they said. He tells the agents not to stand. The back of the limousine has these sort of like steps that are welded onto the undercarriage. And the agents, these two tall agents, would stand on those steps and hold on to this metal bar that's welded into the trunk, and they would ride the back of the limousine, standing up, looking around as Kennedy is in the back passenger seat. They're told not to stand there. Not to stand. We don't want agents on the back of the limousine. This is coming from Washington. So this is a little odd. Who's sending these messages from Washington? So the agents couldn't even believe it. They go, let's call Washington and find out. That doesn't make sense. So they call Washington. There's a man by the name of Gerald Paine, spelled B-E-H-N, Gerald Paine. Gerald Paine is the head of the Secret Service who never left Kennedy's side from the day Kennedy was elected. In every motorcade, he rides directly in front of Kennedy in the front passenger seat. He's glued to Kennedy. But for the Dallas trip, suddenly Gerald Paine says, I'm going to take a vacation. It's the most important trip Kennedy's ever going to take. And people are terrified that the people in Texas are so anti-Kennedy, there may be somebody who takes a shot at Kennedy. They're terrified. So it's a big, big, important trip for the Secret Service to go to Dallas with Kennedy. But Gerald Paine says, I'm going to take off. And the reason why was Adelaide Stevenson went before Kennedy. He was ambassador to the UN or something, and he went before Kennedy. And forgive me if I got his position wrong. I think he was ambassador to the UN. But he went to Texas before Kennedy, and they were bashing signs over his head. They thought these were right-wing Texans who did not want a left-wing, president. But there was a tremendous outpouring of love for Kennedy, too, from a lot of other people. The motorcade was filled with people who loved Kennedy, but they didn't know that going in. So the Secret Service, Gerald Paine says, I'm taking a vacation. So now he takes a vacation, stays in Washington, but then decides he's really not in the mood for a vacation. And he decides to go and work from the East Wing, in his office in the East Wing. And he's calling the shots from the East Wing on the day at Dealey Plaza and the days leading up to it. So when the agents are told not to stand on the back, one of them calls Paine. And he says, look, what are we doing here? And he goes, oh, don't be too overzealous in crowding the president, he says. We don't want guys on the back. And in the meantime, don't crowd him too much. A little bizarre. So the other agent hangs up and he says, that came right from Paine. He goes, Paine? Paine's supposed to be on vacation. He says, yeah, but he came back and he's working out of the East Wing right now. Okay. What else does Winston Lawson do? There's 8 motorcycle cops that are supposed to be surrounding the limousine at all times. They bump 4 to the back. They say, we only want 4 motorcycle cops around Kennedy's limousine. We don't want 8. So now those two tall guys who would normally stand on the trunk the trunk lid, holding onto the trunk lid, they would definitely obstruct the view from behind of Kennedy's head if somebody's shooting from the book depository or the Daltex building. So those guys are gone. Now the 8 motorcycle cops who might obstruct a view from the grassy knoll, they limit that to 4. Now they tell the press bus, which was a couple of cars back, they tell them, we're going to bump you to the back of the line. These guys are professional photographers who know how to snap pictures in the midst of wars even. These guys don't get really that scared under fire, let alone, these guys would have been snapping pictures. They bumped them all the way to the back of the line inexplicably. They don't know why they're being bumped. They're gone. So now this is all happening on the orders of Winston Lawson, who's getting the messages from Gerald Bain back in Washington. So now they say, we're going to make a last minute, the Elm Street turn wasn't originally in the motorcade route. That was only made 2 days before, by the way. There's a last minute change. We're going to make a right onto Elm Street, then a quick left, and it's going to bring the limousine down to a slow crawl, putting Kennedy in a canyon of buildings in a kill zone, what we know now to be the kill zone. Why was that last minute change made to the limousine route, to the motorcade route, by the Secret Service? We don't know. We don't know. And why did the security detail end before Elm Street? If you watch the Zapruder film, there's just a few scattered people there who are kind of catching the end. Where are all the police? Where are all the agents? It's all done. They ended it before Elm Street. So that's another thing.
I didn't realize that. So the parade was basically over at that point.
Oh yeah, it's pretty much done. He's a minute away from getting onto the Stemmons Highway to go to the trademark, the international trademark, and it's done. Kennedy is almost out of danger. He's got like how many 100 yards to go before he's free, and bang. And so this is like really. So Jesse Curry writes a small book. It's almost like a pamphlet, and it's like a really tiny book, but it almost like was. I believe Jesse Curry was one of the Dallas policemen who was not corrupted. And Curry writes a book basically saying, stop blaming the Texas police. All of these last minute mysterious changes weren't made by me. They were made by Winston Lawson. And then I did a dive into who the heck is pulling Winston Lawson's strings. And it's Gerald Bain, who's supposed to be on vacation, and he's not. So if all of these things don't happen by the Secret Service, Kennedy's alive today. So you could say the mob, you could say the Cuban exiles, you could say the CIA, but somebody in very high places were gotten to. And I don't know if Bain was approached by Allen Dulles, Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, a CIA agent he knew. We don't know. We don't know. Somebody might know. And I think it may come out if it's not redacted or destroyed already. But somebody's got to take a look. If you want to kill a Roman emperor, you better get the Praetorian Guard to go with you. You need to law Caligula where he's got to get killed. Somebody's got to. So something's up with that. And there's another Secret Service head who was there for like decades. I don't have his name with me. Urbanus Edmund Bowman, Baughman.
It's in the book. Is this in the book?
It's in my book. Urbanus Edmund Bowman, who basically stopped short. He like questions everything that they did because he was the former Secret Service head, and he's like, what the hell did they do? How many things did they do wrong? He stopped short of accusing them of complicity. And this is a guy who's a former Secret Service chief. Here's what's interesting too. If you cost the president his life, Winston Lawson admits he did. He goes, I'm the first Secret Service agent who cost the president his life. I quoted him. He goes on to get a nice cushy job with the Department of Defense. Little odd. I wouldn't trust him to walk my dog after that. What happens to Gerald Bain? Gerald Bain made all these calls from Washington. Does he get sacked? Is he unemployed the following week? He mysteriously becomes the head of Lyndon Johnson's detail. And Johnson trusts him enough to protect him? A little weird to me. A little strange. So, keep an eye out when these documents get dumped. everybody keeps going CIA, CIA, CIA. I'm the first person who said my whole end of the book is let's take a closer look at the Secret Service. They may have been told to act on behalf of the CIA. I don't know. But something's mysteriously happening in Dealey Plaza that only the Secret Service could do. And there's another thing. When Oswald, Jesse Curry, wanted to transfer Oswald from the jail to the county, from the police headquarters to the county jail, in the middle of the night, undercover, and word came from Washington that you need to show Oswald. He needs to be shown to the public. And Jesse Curry couldn't figure that out. Why the hell would we show him to the public? Why does he have to be shown to the public? Well, I think it starts making sense to Jesse Curry, literally when the shots rang out in the garage, fired by Jack Ruby. At that point, Jesse Curry might have said, oh, now I know why Washington wanted him to be shown to the public. So somebody's calling some shots in Washington, D.C. And that would explain to you why for 60 years we are not allowed to see the documents. It's not because it's all the mob, but the mob had something to do with it. But who else is involved that doesn't want us to see the documents? And, look, I doubt that we'll get, I think they'll be heavily redacted. I think a lot of things are gone already, lost, destroyed, but we'll see.
It just seems like if the story that you're telling is even close to true, there's just too much trust that would be lost in all of these institutions. And, the way that the government's even really redefined democracy as being supporting these public institutions, it's like you'd have to tear the whole government down to the studs and rebuild everything. Like all these intelligence agencies would be completely gutted. Like it's just unimaginable that this kind of a lapse could ever even be admitted to, it seems like.
So let's go on that, right? Because I agree with you. So I don't know. I don't have any of the facts in front of me, but let's discuss it, right? Whether you love or hate Trump doesn't matter to me. There were 2 attempts on his life. He's the guy who's trying to give us this all. Leading up to the election, there were 2 attempts on Trump's life.
Yeah, and the news media hardly even talked about it. It was insane.
They don't even want to discuss it. There's nothing to talk about, nothing to see here. We're getting 60 years of Kennedy compressed into 6 months. We don't have nothing to see here, nothing to talk about. He's a lone kid who's a bit of a wacko like Oswald, the lone nut, and he's got no social media footprint. Every kid I know has a social media footprint.
It's really weird. Like his house got scrubbed too. There's some inconsistencies with the shots too. We went on a deep
Yeah, we
dive
watched
on
a
this
couple
at
of
some
like
point.
crazy acoustic reconstructions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the numbers of shots don't make sense again. There's a lot of weird stuff about that one that I'm sure will become, somebody like you is gonna go back and figure out all the details. And
I would love to. I may, I'd love to hit the ground, but I'm going to tell you, if I came up with the conclusion that the Secret Service was the foremost government agency responsible for Kennedy's death. And it's very odd. I finished this volume that you're reading. I've wrote the whole trilogy already. So figure I put this volume down, and it's been like, I handed this in to Orion and Pegasus / Simon & Schuster months before the assassination attempt on Trump. And I'm telling everybody I know, if this guy keeps saying he's going to release the documents, I'm waiting every time he's on stage going, when is this going to happen? So literally, I was completely unsurprised when it happened in Pennsylvania, and then almost happened again in Florida, completely unsurprised again. The only thing I'm surprised of is that they just can't pull it off. It's like they needed David Ferry again. They desperately are in need of David Ferry and the whole cabal that did Kennedy because they did it seamlessly. These guys can't tie their shoes today. They just can't figure out how to kill Trump.
It does seem like people are less capable than they were 50 years ago, and so maybe that's the whole story. Everybody's just gotten worse all the way down. My question is this: to zoom us out a little bit, when you sat down to write the Borgata trilogy, which is a history of the mob, did you know that this was going to be a central feature?
No, I'm a little bit of a I'm a happy-go-lucky guy, and I don't think too deeply into things until it's time to think deeply into them. So this was commissioned by Lord George Weidenfeld, the the late Lord George Weidenfeld, who I fell in love with. I became friends with. I met him in Sicily, and he introduced himself as George. He was I didn't know who he was. George. We talked about history. We went up and through. We started, I think, in the Middle Ages, and we went up and through like 20th century history. And he tells me I fled the Holocaust with 16 shillings in my pocket. I fled Austria. And I said, "You got to be kidding me! You were in the Holocaust?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I luckily got my parents out, but my grandmothers, they were gassed in the camps." And he tells me this, and I'm like, I'm sitting here with a man. He's in his 90s, and he is literally a piece of history. And I had such a wonderful night with him, and I only knew him as George all night, and I knew his wife as Annabelle. That's how they introduced themselves, and they were the most humble people you could ever imagine. And at the end of the night, he goes, "I would like to publish your next book." So I was invited to Sicily by Axel Springer, the German conglomerate. They wanted me to speak at an editor's retreat. So the Germans, figuring everyone speaks German as a first language, English as a second, they figured even though George was born in Austria, he's in fluent English. He's an Englishman since, the war. So they put me next to George, figuring at least we'll have an Englishman next to him. So I hit it off with George. So George says, "I want to publish your next book." And I'm like, "Publish my next book? Who are you?" It's Lord George Weidenfeld, one of the most prolific book publishers of the 20th century. And he had a habit of meeting people and commissioning new books out of a conversation. And like this man published like Lady Antonio Fraser, Toynbee, the great historian, the memoirs of de Gaulle, the memoirs of Moshe Dayan, I think Lyndon Johnson, the Pope. He's done it all. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to. So we meet the next day in Sicily with his lovely wife, Lady Annabelle, and we're overlooking the ruins of in Agrigento, and we start to discuss what the book is going to be. And we come to the conclusion that the best book that I could write with my perspectives would be a history of the Mafia. What does that entail at the time? For me, I don't know. The stuff I was involved in, I don't know. I had no idea. Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, the Kennedy assassination, the CIA. I told them, because my other books in the past, I wrote an international bestseller that's been translated into 20 languages, and it took me 1 year to write. Start to finish, 1 year, I handed it in. And I edit my own work. My editor was like, "Wow, because you're pretty good at editing too." I edit my own work. I look at it like a stranger does, and I start chopping it up, and and I had it all done in 1 year. So I tell him a year, and then I start to dig, and I go, "Oh my gosh, what did I get myself into?" Yeah. I think you got to think sometimes. Sometimes we get ourselves into stuff, and then we become better people, I guess, figuring it out. But I got myself into something way over my head. And so 1 year moved into 2, into 3, into 4, into 5, into 6, into 7. And before you know it, I'm handing in this 550,000 word book that my new publisher said to me in England, because it was originally published through Lord George's company in England. She goes, "We can't publish a 550,000 page book. Are you kidding me?" She goes, "Cut it down into 330,000 words and into 3 volumes." So that was how it morphed into a trilogy. But when I was on a plane home from Sicily, I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea it would consume 10 years of my life, 12 to 18 hours a day. I would give up all social life, missing, just like normal day-to-day things to try to create and put together something that I thought would be groundbreaking, and I hope it is. But I never knew what I was getting into. I never knew what I was getting into. And it so happens that it collides with a likely document dump. Unless they kill Trump before then, we should be getting a document dump. And if that happens, it so happens that volume 2, which entails everything with regard to the Kennedy assassination, including a lot of new insights and a lot of new moving pieces that I put together, is literally coinciding with that, which I couldn't have anticipated. So the timing is right. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Do you have something else that you're working on?
Or
is like a 10-year book?
Yeah.
Is that all? No, I'm just kidding.
You seem like the type of guy who finishes something and you probably take a deep breath, and then before you know it, you're starting to itch again.
I can't wait. I'm itching already. I want to do so. I hosted a television series for Discovery Channel, and it was called Inside the Gangster's Code. And I went to prisons, maximum security prisons across the globe, and I locked in with the worst criminals and inmates, and to show the viewer an inside look at that subculture. And it really it rated incredibly well. I was nominated for a Grierson Award. I walked down the red carpet in England with Sir David Attenborough. I think it was David and not Richard, the one who still survives, still alive. And we even flipped the government in the Philippines. The documentary we did in the Philippines led to Rodrigo Duterte seizing power. And and I wasn't in favor of Duterte, so because I know he was killing summary justice. He was sending his cops around at night to kill gang members, and the Philippines was overrun with gangs. So I understood that they had a problem, but I do not believe in just shooting them and mowing them down, nor do I believe in the innocent people who were killed in the midst of him doing this. So the people in the Philippines had it to the point where they wanted him, but then he invites me he wants to air it in front of Congress and have me there. So first I hear the documentary goes viral in the Philippines, and I'm like, what? Why just the Philippines? The whole show was great, but what happened? Well, first it goes viral, and then they said the president's using it as a tool to gain power and oust the Aquino government. So I'm like, get out of here. I don't know if I believe all that. And then I start getting emails from the Manila Times, and then the New York Times ends up doing the New York Times World Desk did an incredible article. They covered the whole story. I'll send you guys a link if you don't have it. And they basically, he wants to now use me as a propaganda tool, and he wants me to watch the show in front of Congress. And I'm like, I am not in favor of he may be good. I think I said it's something like he may be an immediate sort of like antidote for all of their ills at the moment, but they definitely deserve something better than him. You can't have people gunning people down. I believe in the rule of law, and I suffered at the hands of the rule of law, and I learned to respect it and understand it and believe in it. So, I'm totally against that, but that's how powerful the documentaries was. So I am looking to do something maybe a little easier first with television as I polish up volume 3 and hand it and get it in, which is due kind of like in a couple of months, but it's written already. So I just got to give a final coat of polish. And I want to jump into hosting something for television, get out there. TV pays incredibly well, but it's a lot more exciting too than sitting at my desk. And I've just been hunched over my desk for way too long. And I just feel like I want to get out there, meet people, be around people, and show people different worlds. So I'm not sure what it's going to be, but I want to do something TV, which is much more lighter. TV is so easy. Like, you film a shoot, you get a shot, and they're like, all right, coffee break. I'm like, all right, we got Starbucks. Yeah, Starbucks. We're going to hand out sandwiches too in about a half hour. Then we shoot a little more. And they're like, all right, we're going to go to a restaurant tonight. What kind of wine you like? And I'm red or white. We'll call ahead. And I'm like, wow, this is really easy filming. It might be hard when you're locked in with the inmates, but even that's fun to me, meeting people. So that's kind of cool. So I'm going to do a little TV, then jump back into a new book. I don't know what book yet. I got a few ideas. I have trouble pitching stuff that people feel that, they want to pigeonhole you. You can only write about mob stuff and prison stuff. But please let me write about this, or let me write about no. Stay in your lane. A good example is I had some rave reviews for my first volume, and those same media outlets did not even bother to cover the second, which is way more interesting, better written. Everything you could think of, but I think I swayed out of my lane. Now I'm in American history. Now I'm talking about Lyndon Johnson and the Kennedys. You're a mob guy. You could tell us about Lucky Luciano. You could tell us about Frank Costello, but make sure you stay in your lane, Mr. Ferrante. That's for us to do. So I feel like there is some type of deadly silence that, to NPR's credit, NPR's Morning Edition ran an incredible piece. They did my first book and they did my second book. I thank them for that. The New York Times did a mention for the first, shut me down on the second. Publishers Weekly did a rave review for the first, nothing for the second. Wall Street Journal, decent review, mixed, but fair enough. I liked it. Wall Street Journal, nothing for the second. So I feel like I swerved out of my lane. So I have to be careful. I told you I wrote a book in jail about the antebellum South. They've been telling me for 20 years I'm not allowed to publish it. It breaks my heart. I just believe in freedom. I believe in a colorless society. I lived in that hell. I lived in the racial tension, the racial murders, and it's heart-wrenching to see it. I do not want to live in a society like that. So, all those racial divisions that they push on us, I feel like it's despicable, and they've done it to us. And I think it's a divide and conquer attitude, but
I
whatever.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dark world, but I appreciate that you've devoted yourself to making the best of it. I think that it's easy to get bent under the weight of it and not recover. I think that history is littered with people that have gone down a path that isn't the best and have just maintained it. And I think that there's a lot to be said about somebody who looks out at the world and says, maybe things can be different for me. And maybe this isn't an irredeemable set of choices that I've made. And I think that that's kind of the thing that's necessary for today. Like, we had a really interesting conversation a long time ago with I want to say he was a Georgetown professor. You remember Joseph Mitchell, I think it was his name? And he was talking about how there had been this arc that appeared in society of irredeemable sin, where it was something that was really important about religious doctrine when people still went to church and read the Bible, is that you can get forgiveness, that you can do bad things, and then upon the strength of your own recognizance and atonement, that there can be a way back. And that's something that I think we have lost touch with a little bit in the modern world, because in the modern world there is this sense, and he argues this, that there is a culture of indelible sin that has arisen, where when you have done wrong, that is not something that you can ever wash off of yourself ever again. And
This is at the roots of cancel culture and stuff like that.
yeah, I mean, he linked it to cancel culture, but I think it's much wider than that.
Yeah, I do agree. I think cancel culture is a symptom of it, but it is much bigger. I agree.
And I think that the world of ideas and of history and of reconstructing the past and doing this labor of love of putting together a theory for how the world works is, I mean, I'm biased because this is kind of what we do, but I think that it's one of the greatest services that you can offer the world, is this process of going out and seeing it and arranging it in a way so that other people can see a little bit more clearly. Like, that's the work of all passionate minds, I think.
I also love how you highlight that there's no real school that can teach you how to do that, right? You have to just look at the people who've come before and use them as your teachers. Like, I've always felt that way about art too. It's like there's no better teacher, whatever your art is, there's no better teacher than just putting yourself in the position of enjoying and experiencing that art with as much of your time as possible. Like these are roads that we all have to figure out for ourselves. So I thought that was a really inspirational part of your story too. I don't know, man. You're just you're an exceptional person. It's been an awesome few hours. This is, if my brain would function more, I could probably sit here for 4 more hours listening to you. It's just incredible.
I think that we should just do it again a little bit down the road. Let's get this conversation out, see what people think of it, what questions they have. And I know that you've written about science. I know that you've written about a ton of other stuff, and there's plenty more left to talk about.
Awesome. Great. I can't wait. I had such a wonderful time with you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was great. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. We'll send you a link when it comes out, and
everybody should buy the books. Books plural. It's the Borgata Trilogy. So this, we've been talking about Volume 2. Volume 3 is probably going to come out next year?
Yeah, either end of this or the beginning of next.
Okay, and so Volume 1 is basically the history of the Mafia through to the probably 30s, 40s.
Yeah, so it starts in 1860 Sicily, and it goes up to about 1960 America. So it's a big 100-year block, the first volume.
Excellent.
Yeah. and the second volume picks up with 60 and goes to around 1980. And then the final volume would be Autumn of Empire, and that would be my own time, which would be 1980 up until around 2005, I would say. I was released from prison in 2003. I saw a Mafia I didn't recognize, but I had already decided to leave that world. So that's sort of like when it was already done. And I kind of trace it to monumental figures that have been erased from the scene by then. And as they sort of like are terminated from the scene, those are the last, sort of like the last of the Mohegans, and you don't see them again. And sort of the whole thing goes with them. So that's Autumn of Empire. I think the Mafia is dead in America, but it was based on family. It was based on omerta. It was based on different values, even if it was a twisted set of values. And you could literally trace the decline of American society neck and neck with the decline of the Mafia.
Ooh, that might be a whole conversation in and of itself.
Yeah,
I would
that's
love
gonna be
I would love
fantastic.
to unpack that thesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk again, Lou. It was great. It was wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much.
I look so forward to it. Thank you so much for having me, both of you. I really appreciate. I don't know how Julia finds you people, but you guys were awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, tell her thank you. She's always reaching out to us about people, and so I appreciate
I'm
it.
glad we finally took her up.
Yeah, she finally really nailed one with you two. That's great.
Oh.
Yeah, it was really, really enjoyable. Thank you so much. I got to really, it was so good. It was cathartic in a way.
The feeling's mutual. Thank you.
All right, man. We'll stay in touch. We'll have a great rest of your day. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you. You as well. Bye.
Bye, Lou.
Bye, everybody.